On behalf of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, I'd like to welcome you to the PBSCCS Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Messina.
I'd like to transition specifically to talking about your role now at the complex. I want to start really simple. Just what are your day-to-day tasks? What does your responsibilities look like? What is your schedule? And then we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have two different schedules throughout the year. When the season starts this year, it was May to the end of July. It's a night schedule, quote unquote. So coming into the complex around 11 or so, getting a lift in, and then go throughout our day after that. But what we just got out of is we had a continuation camp to keep getting our guys reps and a couple games during the week. So we're on a morning schedule, similar to a spring training schedule. Wake up around 4:45, 5, go train at 5:30, done, get cleaned up at 7, and then we have a meeting with our medical staff at 7:40, our trainers and our physical therapists. It's really important to us, again, that we're on the same page and we communicate about what's going on. So I know what might be getting done in the training room, and they know what we're doing in the weight room with guys, and I think it's pretty valuable that nothing gets missed there. That's something I think we do a good job of. Then after that meeting, depends on the schedule for the day, but we usually have about 30 minutes before position players come in. Then we take them through some sort of mobility circuit or lift or CNS prep. Then they're out, and 30 minutes to an hour later, we have pitchers in, do the same thing with them. And then have some guys who might be throwing bullpens after that at 10:30, 11. Have those guys lift and do their arm care, and usually done with on the floor stuff by 12:31. Do some work on the back end and head out whenever that's over. So it's been pretty.
And then in regards to maybe the lifting schedule for you guys, how often are you guys lifting? Maybe position players and relievers? Obviously starters are kind of their own beast. Are you guys like a 2 times a week, 3 times a week? Does it kind of depend on the guy and their goals?
Yeah, I think it depends on where the athlete's at. I think by level that might change a little bit. For our guys at the complex, try to get 2 good lifts in a week. We have them doing something in the gym every day, whether that's mobilizing or doing some explosive quick twitch stuff without weight. But that way we get eyes on them every day and coach them up a little bit more, because it's an important window of physical development for these guys, because they've got a low training age, still learning how to move, still learning how to get stronger. Just depends where they're at. But pitchers, same thing. Try to get 2 lifts in a week, and that way we could go throughout the season and progress their programs as they go.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of developing younger players, and that's one of the questions I have written down for you is just you're working with younger players in the complex, you're developing the future of the organization. You mentioned earlier some of them don't even speak English yet, right? They're very young Latin players, or it's a lot of high school kids. So what are you looking to kind of address the most with them, maybe in terms of the weight room, but then also in terms of like professionally developing them so that they're prepared to move up? Like, what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, I think that's huge, and it's something I've really enjoyed the last 2 years. It's a population and a group that I really enjoy working with. Like I said, most of them are 0 training age, don't have a lot of experience in the weight room. Our college guys from the draft will have a little more usually, but we usually start with our players coming up from the Dominican complex and some guys that have been there for a year or 2 as well. But I think the big thing is what are our lowest hanging fruits, just getting them in a good routine. I think warm-up's probably the most important thing. Don't want guys going out cold and getting hurt. So teaching them, hey, come in here 10, 15 minutes, get a sweat in, go through a couple different movement patterns, get your hips go, whatever it might be. Everyone's going to have a different routine, and we try to individualize that as much as possible once we get to know the guys. But I think getting them into a solid routine that they do every day is probably our primary objective. And then, for me, I tried to the last 2 years get the guys to love something in the weight room as much as possible. So make it a fun training environment, along with educating them along the way too. Hey, this is why we do certain things. I mean, it could be as simple with some of these guys as, hey, you got to make sure you count your reps the right way because we program things for a reason. One or two might not be that big of an issue one day, but if we're doing the wrong thing over and over again, we're probably not going to progress the same. So it's really simple stuff, but if you make that your primary objective, especially at the lower training age group of athletes, I feel like we've seen guys come a long way. So it's been really cool to see.
And then how about in terms of testing for those guys? How frequently are you testing, if at all? Are you kind of just letting the training look like testing? Are you using technology? Are there movement screens you're doing? Like, what are you doing to kind of track progress for the kids?
Yeah, we do a variety of testing throughout the year. We get them a movement screen at the beginning and the end of the year just to see where they're at. And then again, another way we work with our athletic trainers, if they get hands on a guy or they ask for a stretch, or worst case, they need an eval for something, we get an idea of where they're at. And if they're really lacking something, we could give them some correctives or something in the warm up that could help nudge that forward. And then as far as the strength and power development, we do a couple different force plate tests throughout the year. Counter movement jump is probably the one we use the most. And I think getting that harder at an affiliate, obviously, with some of our other guys, but at the complex, try to do it once a month at least. And that way we could see how they're progressing throughout the season.
And then you also mentioned that you have meetings with the other medical members just to kind of make sure that you guys are all on the same page. How frequently are you meeting with the other members of the medical? And then in addition, we kind of hit on it a little bit, but how about meeting with baseball staff? And, how are you guys going about just making that collaboration very seamless? Are you having formal meetings, informal meetings? Are there player profiles and player plans in place? Like, what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, constantly with our medical staff in particular, I try to talk to, got 2 trainers the last 2 years, and I try to talk to them as much as possible. If I have some downtime in the weight room, go over there and update them on what's going on, or even just to say hi. It's good to keep that relationship going and be close with your trainers. And they'll come over. They do a good job coming into the weight room, letting us know what's going on, see what we're doing as well. I think it's just something we put a premium on. I think we need to. We've had a great relationship with our trainers the last 2 years, and I think it is the best for our athletes by far. Nothing gets missed, and we're on the same page about everyone. As far as the baseball staff, I have a meeting with everyone at the beginning of the day. I try to check in with our manager at the end of the day if there's anything schedule wise that he needs from us or we might ask of him. It's just good to keep that an open line of communication. And then with our hitting and pitching coach, see them throughout the day and try to have a quick chat and see what's going on. And that's sometimes where they might ask for something, or, hey, what do you think about this? Or I could ask the same thing. So it's not always a formal route of communication, which is really interesting, which is why I think the relationships with everyone in the building is really important, because then you could have more informal conversations. And to me, what I've seen so far is those could have the most value in making a change for someone or helping someone get better at whatever.
Yeah, I feel like in the baseball setting, you spend so much time together that there are like random pockets of opportunity throughout the day where you might see the hitting coach or the pitching coach or even the manager and just like, hey, what do you got on so-and-so? And you'd be like, oh, funny, I was going to come find you. I'm glad, you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many opportunities to just chat throughout the day that, yes, the formal meetings are good. They're important. You have to hit really all the highlights there. But sometimes it feels like they become redundant and unnecessary and forced, where some of those informal conversations, again, this is in my own experiences, like those happen to be the best for brainstorming and like thinking things through for certain people. Because again, if you have a meeting and you're going to talk about 50 players and you have an idea about one player, like you may not have the time to bring that up because you kind of got to get through all those guys, right? But if you have an idea for that one player and you see the hitting or pitching coach at the cage or in the bullpen, or even just, talking shop by the end of stretch or something like that while they're doing throwing program, you have much more opportunity to kind of express your ideas. Or as you mentioned earlier, they may even come to you and be like, hey, this guy in the bullpen was really struggling with this. What do you got on that? I think that's something that in my time in baseball really was developing and really growing. And I don't know, I mean, to us, like as strength coaches, from the jump, I've always kind of been told, like, put the athlete at the center of everything, try to collaborate with everybody, make all the decisions together, in the best interest of the athlete, and specifically in baseball, the player on the field. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it's just been like the baseball coaches lately have had like this aha moment, like, oh, wait, like we can lean on these people and they have some expertise and they can really help us. And I think it only makes the game better. I think it makes everybody think a little bit more critically about the decisions they're making, instead of just like, do this rowing exercise. It's like, well, how about we do this specific rowing exercise because of this, right? And it just makes all of us kind of elevate our game a little bit. And again, ultimately, at the end of the day, like the players are playing the game, and we should probably put them at the forefront of every decision we make. So it seems like the game has moved in a right way with that. And, I think for you specifically at the complex, working with those young kids, like those conversations become that much more important, because some of those kids just don't know what they don't know, right? It's almost like the more you move up and the more those players have been around and developed their own routines for themselves, they kind of have an idea of what works for them. They just need a little tinkering, where, like you said, some of the kids at those lower levels, they don't even realize they should warm up before they go out. They're just like, oh, let me tie my shoes and go play catch. And it's like, I kind of need you to take care of these things. And then the pitching coach, if you have them on your side, they're like, hey, you need to listen to Joe, like go find him in the weight room, make sure you get your routine, get your mobility, get your whatever done. And again, at the end of the day, that makes all the players better. That makes all of us better. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's cool to hear that you've seen that progress throughout your time in baseball. And that's why I think just team is so important. At the end of the day, I've always been taught, and I believe, hey, we're support staff here to help everyone else and serve. But it's cool to see when the coaches and whoever else wants to involve you in something. And that way we're all talking about the guy and we have some different perspectives. And I think that only helps, as long as everyone's putting their ego aside and working together. It's not going to end up hurting anyone.
How often are you guys playing games? I know you said there was 2 different schedules. Were there more games during the night schedule, during the day schedule, or is it kind of about the same?
Yeah, so for the night schedule and the ACL season, it was 5 to 6 games a week, just depended on the week. And then for the continuation camp schedule, we had 3 games a week. So focus a little more on practice and the development piece of what these guys are doing, as opposed to the in-game stuff. And then the extended spring training schedule was 5 games a week, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my question. It's like, if you're playing different amounts of games, does your programming and your training look a little bit different to kind of match the demands of playing more games versus less games, and like the window of development, being able to kind of push the training a little bit more? Or is it all kind of similar, just because at the end of the day, like it's still a lot of baseball volume?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it probably lays somewhere in between. Like with this camp we just had, it was 3 games a week as opposed to 5 or 6, but it's also the end of the long season where these guys have probably played and practiced more than they already have, unless they were here for a year or 2 already. So I think it's kind of a delicate balance. If we have a conversation with a coach or whomever that says, hey, we're going to give this guy a little less on the baseball end of things, you guys could push the envelope a little more on the weight room side of things. We've just got to make sure we're not blowing up their volume in any way, shape, or form, because the most important part is to keep them healthy and get them into the off season, which is where they're going to make their most important gains.
Speaking of the off season, the one thing that kind of goes maybe unmentioned sometimes about working in the complex is that there's also usually duties in the off season. I know that you're home now, which I'm very happy that you get a little bit of downtime after the season, but what does your off season look like? How often are you going into the complex? Do you get some free time to just kind of unwind? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, we have a schedule with all of our strength coaches just to make sure there's some sort of coverage throughout the off season. We have a strength coach that's exclusively on minor league rehab this year, so he's got that held down, but we try to help him out too and cover a couple days here and there. We might have a camp depending the year in November and usually January that we've all got to go back for, but usually nice to have a couple weeks at least where you could spend with the family and take some time off at the beginning of the off season, then around Christmas time in December, and backtrack that to Thanksgiving. We usually have some time. Just depends what the athletes are being brought back for. Sometimes they're brought back in the off season for something, and then we're expected to be there. But usually it's pretty open, at least what I've experienced so far.
And then something that some of the listeners may not be as familiar with, talk to me about the dead period and then what your role is, how much you can interact with players, can they even come to the complex, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so there's a minor league dead period that started last year, I believe. That was my first year, so I don't know if it predated that a year or two, but that's what I've seen last year and this year. It's from about the end of November to the beginning of January. So it's a time that we are not allowed to contact the players unless they request any sort of programming or questions from us, which I found most of them want some sort of coaching or programming or advice throughout the off season. But what I try to do throughout the off season, what I want to do this year in particular, is keep good contact with these guys and, hey, just see how they're doing. And if they have any questions about what their programming might look like. And I find most of them are pretty good about reaching out on their own. They want to be coached. They want to start the next year off right. But that's what that looks like so far as the dead period goes.
Yeah, it's a very weird time. Like, you're not supposed to interact, but there's ways around it. You're not supposed to be at the complex, but there are ways around it. So it's even confusing for me sometimes. And I've been a part of it. So, but let's make a transition here, man. What do you believe makes a strength and conditioning coach successful?
Yeah, I think, I always say, I think there's a million ways to skin a cat as far as this job goes. A lot of different ways to be successful, a lot of different philosophies you can use. I'm biased because this is the way I was taught and what I strongly believe in, but I think people always have to come first. I think if you didn't get into this job to help people and be a guide, mentor, whatever you want to call it, I think that's probably the most important thing. I've always been told, it's something you hear in strength and conditioning a lot, but I think it's really true. It doesn't matter what your program is. You could have the most dialed in, crazy disco program on earth, but if the guys don't believe in you, trust you, believe what you're saying, it's not going to matter for anything. You get away with some pretty simple programs and simple stuff that if you show the guys you really care and you coach them up hard and gain their trust, it's going to work a million times better than the other way. So to me, you've always got to put people first, got to be selfless, got to work your butt off. And I think putting your ego to the side too. Like I said, there's a lot of people with diversity of opinion that help you get better. But if you're not willing to put your ego aside and learn something, and hey, I might be wrong on this, it's okay to be convicted and believe in something, but there's got to be some room for maybe this might not be right or whatever. I think those are a couple big things from coaches I've seen do this for a long time that are very successful, and things I've seen so far that have helped me a lot.
Is there anything in particular that you're doing to kind of create that buy-in? Obviously, putting people first is kind of a straightforward thing, but what kind of ways are you showing players that you care for them? What kind of ways are you going about creating buy-in, especially with those young kids, right? Like the young kids kind of need a life mentor, I think, sometimes anyway. So is it more of like a lead by example thing, or are there specific things that you do either daily, weekly, monthly that you try to hit to make sure that you're creating that buy-in you're talking about?
Yeah, I think Again, one of the most important things is you've got to be authentic to yourself. So I know for me, I like to talk. I've got a lot of energy. Try to greet everyone who comes into the weight room every day by name. I think it's important too. Something I've realized as I've been going on the little bit I have is building a relationship isn't just one day. You could have a really good conversation with a guy day one. Hey, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your favorite food? Whatever. But if you don't keep building that relationship, then it just stagnates. I think, again, why I got into this is I love people. I want to help people get better. I want to be a part of their development, So having good conversations with guys every day, even if it's as simple as, oh, how's your weekend? What are you looking forward to this week? Or something out of the blue. I don't know. But I think it's important that you keep the conversation going with everyone possible. There's a lot of guys in there, but I try to make sure I have a good conversation with everyone every couple of days, and might not always happen. We've got a lot going on, but I think that's probably the biggest way I've gone about that. And then from the performance side, I think these guys, the younger guys, could get lost in the monotony and how long the season can be, but keeping them engaged and, hey, I gave everyone a goal sheet this year and I met with them 2 or 3 times in the season. This is what we expect out of you. What do you want to get out of this? I might not really know right now, but getting them to think about it, I think, is really valuable. And then we're all engaged with what's going on. I could say, hey, what you've been doing the last couple of days, you've done a good job all season. We're trying to work towards X, Y, or Z, but if you're taking days off, it's not going to happen. I think that's pretty simple stuff that could help show the guys that you're invested in what they're doing. And then everyone just knows what's going on and what the goals are, which I think is critical.
That's really great stuff, man. I really like all of that. I kind of want to expand on this. Just, is there any advice that you have for others in the field, and then maybe in particular younger coaches that are looking to get into baseball?
Yeah, I just think, I'm still figuring out my way to go about this, but I just think it's really important that, we're trying to get better as coaches and we all want to move up and get, wherever, but it's important to realize that the athlete and the team come first. So even for me, and this is a focus for me, I think I could get lost in what I'm doing throughout the day. And some guys ask me a question about an exercise I've explained 6 or 7 times already. I'm like, all right, you got to do this. No, I think you've got to be really patient and take your time. There's a standard. So you want guys to focus and listen and whatever else, but I think you've got to be patient with people. And when you don't give people the time of day, even if it might be the least talented guy on the roster or the most, whoever it is, you've got to give everyone a good effort every day. And I think that takes a conscious effort that people don't realize, something I try to lock in on every day. And some days I do a lot better than others. So I would just say, make sure you're giving everyone your best every day, because again, this is a job that's not about you, it's about other people.
Yeah, I appreciate your humility there in saying that some days are better than others. And I think for me, that is probably the hardest part of professional baseball. If you are really in it for the right reasons and you're really trying to just help the players and help the staff and help the team to win, it takes so much self-sacrifice that sometimes you forget to take care of yourself, to be completely honest. And some days you just don't have it, and you just have to figure out how to give the best of whatever you have. And it's a very demanding thing to do. And I think maybe some of us could be a little bit better served to give ourselves some humility and understand that, hey, I always am giving my best to others. Sometimes I need somebody to give their best to me to just help me, and to not be afraid to ask when you need help. But generally speaking, yeah, it's very demanding, and being patient with other people is really hard sometimes. It's something that I had to look in the mirror for quite a bit, and I think I've done a lot better as I've gotten older. It's just being patient with other people. I always expect myself, I'm very much like you, right? I'm a higher energy person. I'm kind of just go, go, go. You tell me something once and I get it done, and then the next day it's done again without you having to ask, where not everybody operates like that. And I think that's something that will help other strength coaches to realize. It's like, not everybody operates on the same wave that you do. And sometimes you have to get on their wave to like connect with them to make sense. And sometimes you have to find ways to get them to come onto your wave, and finding that balance is really tricky. And sometimes you want to bash your head on the wall for like, just listen to me. Why are you not listening to me? But sometimes you have to take a step back. And I think a lot of guys in my own personal experience that get labeled as uncoachable or difficult athletes to work with, a lot of times it's just people not realizing that they have to take a different approach with those people. And sometimes it's really hard to bend your own morals or your own beliefs. But as you mentioned, like whether it's the top draft pick in the organization or the last draft pick or an unsigned guy or a 10-year major league vet or a 3A guy trying to get into the big leagues for the first time, like everybody in that organization has potential. Somebody believed in them to be a professional and to play the sport at a professional level. And so you have to try to give everybody the attention that, they deserve. And sometimes it's really hard. And, I think there's a lot of people that like, oh yeah, I bring it every day. And it's like, some days you don't, and you bring what you can. And, you try to get by. And as soon as you're there, the guy's like, hey, you're off today. What's wrong? And you're like, fuck, I thought I was giving you what I could. Like, listen, man, I'm doing everything I can to help you. I'm here. But it's just such a long and exhausting schedule that there are people who just don't understand that. And if you're not in it, you don't understand it. And there are people who are in it who are not really in it, and they don't understand it either. But the people that are really fully committed to it the way that you're talking about, it's exhausting. It really is. And so sometimes, like, as I said earlier, I'm very happy that you're at home, you're visiting your family, because sometimes you need that recharge, man. It's really draining sometimes.
I appreciate you saying that. And how have you navigated that as you've gone on, just the consistency and giving people your best every day?
Yeah, it's hard, man. You have to have a really good support system. I've been really blessed with my wife. We've been together for a very long time. And she always kind of understood that, for me, baseball was going to come first until I kind of got what I wanted out of the field. And she's always been right there. She's a very independent person, but at the same time, she can kind of tell when I'm getting a little bit off, and she's not afraid to call me out on my stuff when I'm not at my best. And, sometimes it's really exhausting, but I think for me, a lot of the time it was like I was putting so much energy into people at the field that when I went home, I wasn't giving her the same attention. And it got to the point where I realized that although I may be really exhausted and it may cost me in the short term to give her a little extra energy, in the long term, it's going to make me feel better to have that balance, to have somebody to kind of lean on. And that is really kind of what has been my saving grace in kind of navigating all of that, is just having that good support. Obviously, your family, your friends, but I only see my parents every once in a while. We FaceTime maybe once every couple of weeks. We text to check in, but it's not the same as when you go home every night and, you talk to your wife, or like we spend 10 days on a West Coast trip, like finding time to connect with her, like just making sure that I would stay grounded. And that was what really helped me the most. And that's probably some of the best advice I could give someone who wants to stay in the game long term, is like having somebody who understands the schedule, understands you as a human, how you tick, and they can kind of keep you in check throughout all of that. I think that goes a really long way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's huge. It's tough too. You did this longer than I have, so I understand what you're saying, but I can only imagine over the course of years when things add up, that's important.
Correct. Yeah. And it takes a saint of a human to walk into the baseball life and fully accept what it is. So if you find the right one, do everything you can to keep them in your life. That's my send off on the advice. So let's talk continuing ed resources. You mentioned the Florida Baseball Armory earlier, but any books that you'd recommend, any other seminars that you'd recommend, any podcasts that you listen to, just anything you'd recommend continuing education wise?
Yeah, I think a book I just finished this weekend on the plane called Let Them Lead by John Bacon. Probably the best book that I've read on coaching and leadership. I mean, I took down a note section in my phone and I scroll to see everything. So I think there were some really valuable nuggets and wisdom in there. As far as seminars go, I think we put a premium on continuing education, which has definitely accelerated my learning and my knowledge and development. I just think, like I've said a couple of times, just diversity of knowledge and opinion. And there's been stuff I went to, even the Armory, that I was like, okay, I don't necessarily agree with this, but doesn't mean you have to be hook, line, and sinker on everything. Just critically think about what makes sense about, especially what can I implement from this, I think is really valuable. But I think there's a number of things that you could do, just as long as you have an idea of how to implement it or go and do it with an open mind. That's important. And as far as podcast, I think Eric Cressey is one I listen to pretty frequently. He brings in a number of different guests, some as athletes that he's had in the facility, talk to different professionals in the field, different professionals in the medical side of things. And I think anytime I listen to something he has, I always get something out of it. So it's probably be my main couple.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable to not just go to a seminar and automatically like throw everything out that you've done for whatever you learn there. I think that critical thinking and that filter that you're discussing kind of is the key to understanding. And the thing is that can change, right? Like I was telling somebody this the other day, sometimes when I was in professional baseball, I would write something off because it wouldn't make sense in the setting that I was in. And then as soon as I left and I went somewhere else, it was like, oh, all of these things would make sense in this context, right? So even if you discredit them, you still don't want to ignore them, right? You write them in your little notebook or whatever you bring to the seminar. Hey, this might not work here, but it might work somewhere else. Just having that filter, I think, is a really advanced skill. And if you can develop that, it would just take your continuing education and your learning that much further.
Yeah. I think too, I'm a big note taker, so I have to learn not to write everything down, and then I can't go through everything at the end of it. So I think it's important, what's really trying to get out of this,
Joe, I appreciate you giving me some time away from your family. I have a lightning round for you, and then I promise I'll get you out of here. 4 questions,
Sweet.
long or short of answers as you want. First question, who is your biggest influence in the field of strength and conditioning?
I'll break that into 2. Personally, Coach Everett Gathrin, Coach Ryan Sprague, 2 really great guys I worked under at Ohio State that I learned a ton from. Coach Pete Tomolich, I learned from at Lift Chicago. Those 3 guys supersede anything that I've learned from anybody else or, people on the internet or Instagram. I think as far as more broadly, again, Eric Cressey is someone who I think brings a really common sense approach to training, but you could still dive into some pretty difficult things that are good for baseball athletes and professionals.
If you only had one piece of equipment to train with, what would it be?
COVID times, probably a heavy dumbbell. I think you could do a variety of different movements. You could tempo it. Gives you probably the most options.
What is your biggest accomplishment professionally and or personally?
I'm proud, like you were talking about, it's hard to keep in touch with your family a lot. So I value that. And I see that as accomplishment. I've got a girlfriend who's really been supportive and awesome through this whole thing. Been with me since I started it. So my parents as well, keeping good relationship with those people is a hell of an accomplishment, in my opinion. And then getting this job too, it took a lot of work. So
any career other than strength and conditioning, what would you choose?
Definitely couldn't be sitting at a desk. So I tell people either paint houses or maybe a track coach.
It's not bad. I think most of us would coach something else, right? Like if I'm coaching weights, I'm coaching something.
Yeah, it probably would have to be that. I like being outside too, though. So I said painting.
True. Yes. Joe, again, I appreciate your time. If the listeners want to get in touch with you, where can we get more? Social media, a good spot, or where should we go?
I'm not very active on social media, but Joey L2 on Instagram. would be it.
Perfect. Well, Joe, enjoy your family time, enjoy the downtime, right? And once you get back to AZ, we'll connect again. And in the meantime, stay safe and we'll talk soon.
Sweet. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you.
All right, everybody, that's going to conclude part 2 of this 2-part interview with Joe. I hope you enjoyed both parts of this interview, in particular in this episode discussing working at the Arizona Complex League, relationship building, and creating buy-in with the athletes and the staff that you work with. 3 things that I took from Joe in this part of the episode. Critical thinking is a valuable skill to possess. Both education and environment are important for creating buy-in from those with low training ages, and successful coaches find ways to balance being convicted in their beliefs and being open-minded to the beliefs of others. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again on the next one.